When we think about alcohol, we often think of celebration, relaxation, maybe even connection. But what if I told you that every sip of alcohol, whether it's a glass of wine or a shot of whiskey, changes your brain chemistry in real time? What if I told you that alcohol doesn't just affect your mood tonight, but rewires your brain's reward systems, sleep cycles, and long-term mental health? I'm Dr. Andrew Huberman, and today we're going to explore what alcohol really does to your brain neurologically, chemically, and behaviorally. This is not about fear, it's about understanding. Because once you understand how alcohol affects your brain, you gain power to choose, to recover, and to thrive. Alcohol, specifically ethanol, the type found in beer, wine, and spirits, is classified as a neurotoxin. That means it directly harms the nervous system, including the brain. Unlike some substances that act slowly or only in high concentrations, alcohol begins affecting your brain almost immediately after consumption. When you take a drink, ethanol rapidly crosses the blood-brain barrier, a protective shield that separates the bloodstream from brain tissue. Once it's inside, it starts altering how neurons communicate, how they fire, and how they function. It doesn't take a lot. Even small amounts of alcohol can disrupt the delicate balance of excitation and inhibition in the brain. That balance is essential. Your thoughts, mood, motor control, and memory all depend on it. Ethanol affects several key neurotransmitter systems, including GABA, glutamate, and dopamine. It enhances the effects of GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. This leads to sedation and impaired motor function, what we often experience as feeling relaxed or buzzed, but at the same time, alcohol inhibits glutamate, the brain's main excitatory neurotransmitter. This means it reduces neural activity in areas responsible for planning, decision-making, and memory formation, like the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. That's why people under the influence of alcohol often have poor judgment, impulsive behavior, and trouble forming new memories. These aren't just social effects, they're direct signs of brain dysfunction. On a cellular level, alcohol damages the membranes of neurons. It makes them more permeable and disrupts their ability to send and receive signals. Over time, repeated exposure leads to neuronal shrinkage, synaptic loss, and in severe cases, neuronal death. Alcohol doesn't selectively target just one area of the brain, it has widespread impact. It can alter the cerebellum, which affects coordination, the limbic system, which governs emotion, and the cortex, which is involved in higher-order thinking. The changes might be subtle at first, but they accumulate. What's especially concerning is that the developing brain is even more vulnerable. In adolescents and young adults, whose brains are still undergoing critical growth and refinement, alcohol can cause lasting structural and functional damage. It can interfere with synaptic pruning, myelination, and other essential processes that shape how the brain functions for the rest of life. Chronic alcohol exposure doesn't just impair function, it rewires the brain. It can cause adaptive changes that make the brain dependent on alcohol to function normally. This is one of the reasons withdrawal symptoms can be so severe. The brain becomes so used to the presence of alcohol that removing it causes a cascade of overexcitation, stress, and even seizures. It's also why addiction forms, not because of a lack of willpower, but because the brain has been reshaped to crave and rely on alcohol. Even occasional drinking, when repeated over time, can lead to cumulative damage. It's not just about binge drinking or alcoholism. Each exposure alters the chemical environment of the brain, and while the liver can metabolize ethanol, your brain doesn't have the same detoxifying mechanisms. It absorbs the cost, often silently, until the effects become noticeable: slower cognition, mood instability, disrupted sleep, impaired memory. Understanding that alcohol is a neurotoxin isn't about instilling fear, it's about offering clarity. It's about recognizing that what we put into our bodies, especially substances that cross into the brain, has consequences. And it's about respecting the incredible complexity and vulnerability of the human brain, which is not built to tolerate regular exposure to this kind of chemical assault without paying a price. When people consume alcohol, they often describe the initial effects as relaxing or calming. There's a sense of warmth, ease, and lowered anxiety. This state, which is socially and culturally perceived as pleasant, is frequently misinterpreted as the result of alcohol having a stimulating or mood-enhancing effect. But in reality, this sensation is due to alcohol's depressant action on the central nervous system, particularly its ability to suppress activity in key areas of the brain. Most notably, it reduces the activity of the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain region responsible for judgment, impulse control, decision-making, and social behavior. This is why, after just a drink or two, people may feel more talkative, more confident, and less self-conscious. It's not because alcohol is giving them new thoughts or abilities, it's because it's silencing the part of the brain that would normally regulate and inhibit those behaviors. This suppression of the prefrontal cortex is one of the primary ways alcohol changes behavior. It diminishes our ability to evaluate risk, read social cues accurately, or anticipate the consequences of our actions. Essentially, the brain becomes less capable of exercising executive control. This is a major reason why alcohol is associated with impulsive decisions, things like reckless driving, unprotected sex, aggression, or simply saying things one might not say when sober. The brain, in that moment, is functioning in a more primitive state, one where inhibition is reduced, and impulsive circuits are more dominant. This altered balance between inhibition and impulsivity can create the illusion of confidence or freedom, but it comes at the cost of judgment and control. In addition to impairing the prefrontal cortex, alcohol enhances the function of GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is like the brake pedal of the brain. It slows things down, calms neural circuits, and reduces activity. Alcohol binds to GABA receptors and makes their action stronger, which contributes to the overall sedative effect. This is why alcohol is often used to wind down after a stressful day or to try to manage anxiety. However, this external amplification of GABA does not come without consequences. The brain's natural GABA balance is finely tuned, and repeated artificial enhancement via alcohol can lead to adaptations. Over time, the brain starts producing less GABA on its own or becomes less sensitive to it. As a result, when the alcohol wears off, people often experience rebound anxiety, restlessness, and irritability. This is the body's way of trying to recalibrate after the artificial calm has faded. The suppression of brain activity doesn't stop at GABA. Alcohol also reduces the activity of glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. Glutamate is essential for learning, memory, and alertness. By dampening glutamate signaling, alcohol impairs cognitive function even further. This is why it becomes harder to focus, recall information, or process new stimuli when under the influence. The combined effect of enhancing GABA and suppressing glutamate creates a kind of neurological fog, a slowing down of thought, a blunting of sensory input, and a weakening of memory formation. This also explains why people may experience blackouts during heavy drinking. The brain literally cannot encode new memories because its excitatory signaling has been suppressed too far. Furthermore, while alcohol is sedating in low to moderate doses, it doesn't promote true restfulness or recovery. That's because it disrupts the natural cycling of brain states, something that becomes especially problematic when alcohol is consumed close to bedtime. The brain's transition from wakefulness to sleep and through various sleep stages depends on intricate shifts in neurotransmitter balance. Alcohol interferes with these rhythms by artificially suppressing brain activity, which leads to shallow, fragmented sleep that lacks the essential characteristics of deep or REM sleep. In the short term, this can lead to grogginess and poor concentration the next day. In the long term, disrupted sleep architecture can contribute to mood instability, memory impairment, and overall brain fatigue. Another important aspect to consider is how alcohol's suppression of brain activity masks underlying emotional states. People often drink to cope with anxiety, sadness, or social discomfort, and while the immediate dampening of neural activity may offer temporary relief, it doesn't resolve the underlying problem. In fact, because alcohol interferes with the brain's natural emotion regulation systems, it can make those emotions worse once the alcohol wears off. The brain compensates for the depressant effects by upregulating excitatory pathways, which means that once alcohol is metabolized, people often feel more anxious, more irritable, and more emotionally raw than before they drank. This rebound effect can trap individuals in a cycle where they feel compelled to drink again just to relieve the discomfort that alcohol itself has created. In summary, the so-called relaxation people feel when they drink alcohol is not a sign of true calm or well-being. It's a byproduct of alcohol's suppressive effects on the brain's higher-order functions. This suppression might feel pleasant or liberating in the moment, but it reflects a reduction in the brain's capacity to think clearly, make good decisions, and regulate emotion. What feels like freedom is actually a narrowing of the brain's full potential. And the more often this suppression occurs, the more the brain adapts in ways that reduce its natural ability to regulate stress, emotions, and behavior without alcohol's help. The initial relief comes at a neurological cost, a cost that compounds over time and undermines the very balance the brain works so hard to maintain. When alcohol enters the brain, one of the most profound and immediate effects it has is on the dopamine system, a core neural pathway that governs motivation, pleasure, reward, and reinforcement. Dopamine is often called the feel-good neurotransmitter, but that label only scratches the surface. Dopamine is less about pleasure itself and more about the anticipation and pursuit of rewards. It shapes what we pay attention to, what we desire, and what we're willing to work for. It's crucial for learning and habit formation, and it's central to the development of addiction. Alcohol, like many addictive substances, hijacks this system by creating an artificial and exaggerated release of dopamine, particularly in the nucleus accumbens, a key part of the brain's reward circuitry. This surge of dopamine is what contributes to the initial euphoric feeling or buzz after drinking. It's a biochemical trick that tells the brain something important and desirable has occurred, even though from a survival standpoint, alcohol offers no true nutritional or evolutionary benefit. The dopamine spike reinforces the behavior, making it more likely that the individual will seek out alcohol again. But this increase is short-lived, and it is followed by a sharp decline, a dip in dopamine levels below the normal baseline. This drop doesn't just neutralize the initial pleasure, it often leads to a sense of dissatisfaction, irritability, or even anxiety once the effects of alcohol begin to wear off. This is one of the ways alcohol subtly but powerfully conditions the brain to crave more of it, not for celebration, but to avoid the discomfort that follows. Repeated alcohol use creates deeper and more lasting changes in the dopamine system. Over time, the brain begins to anticipate the artificial dopamine spike and downregulates its own natural production of dopamine, or reduces the sensitivity of dopamine receptors. This is the brain's way of maintaining equilibrium in the face of repeated overstimulation. As a result, baseline dopamine levels fall, and everyday activities that once brought pleasure, like socializing, exercising, eating good food, or achieving goals, no longer feel as satisfying. This phenomenon is known as anhedonia, a state in which a person finds little or no joy in life's ordinary rewards. It's a neurochemical withdrawal from normalcy, and it makes alcohol appear even more attractive by comparison, since it still temporarily boosts dopamine, even if less effectively over time. This neuroadaptation is one of the core mechanisms underlying alcohol dependence. The brain begins to associate alcohol not only with pleasure, but with relief from the low dopamine state that follows drinking. In other words, it becomes both the source of the problem and the temporary solution. This vicious cycle explains why people often drink not to feel good, but to stop feeling bad. The more frequently and heavily someone drinks, the more the dopamine system is disrupted, and the harder it becomes to experience motivation, excitement, or emotional resilience without alcohol. Beyond the immediate dopamine hit, alcohol also affects other systems that interact with the dopamine pathway. For example, alcohol alters opioid signaling in the brain. The body's natural opioids, endorphins, are released during pleasurable activities and can amplify the effect of dopamine. Alcohol artificially stimulates this system too, creating a synergistic boost in reward. Over time, just like with dopamine, the brain becomes less sensitive to its own opioids. This leads to blunted emotional responses, reduced stress tolerance, and a heightened reliance on alcohol to achieve even a baseline level of comfort. It's also important to recognize that alcohol doesn't affect the dopamine system in isolation. It changes the neural circuitry of reward learning and habit formation, particularly in the striatum. The brain begins to associate environmental cues, like the sight of a bar, the sound of a bottle opening, or the time of day, with the anticipated reward of alcohol. These associations become encoded as neural patterns that can trigger powerful cravings, even in the absence of conscious desire. This is why people who have stopped drinking can experience intense urges to drink again when they're exposed to certain cues or stressors. It's not a matter of willpower, it's a reflection of how deeply alcohol has shaped their brain's reward prediction system. As these changes take hold, the motivational landscape of the brain shifts. Alcohol begins to take up more and more space in a person's internal reward map, crowding out other interests, goals, and sources of fulfillment. What may have started as casual or social drinking evolves into a dominant behavioral pattern, often driven not by conscious choice but by subconscious neural wiring. Even when someone wants to stop drinking, the altered dopamine system creates powerful biological resistance. The brain simply doesn't function the same way it did before alcohol use began, and it can take weeks, months, or even years for those systems to begin returning to normal, if they do at all. Understanding the impact of alcohol on the dopamine system sheds light on why drinking can become so compulsive, why quitting can be so difficult, and why relapse is so common. It's not just about habit or environment, it's about fundamental changes in the brain's reward machinery. This insight isn't meant to scare or shame, but to inform, because once you understand how alcohol manipulates your brain's most essential motivational circuits, you begin to see it not as a harmless indulgence, but as a chemical force that shapes who you are, what you want, and how you feel about life itself. And that understanding opens the door to making informed, empowered decisions, not from fear, but from clarity. One of the most profound and long-lasting effects alcohol has on the brain is its ability to impair neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change, adapt, and grow in response to experience. Neuroplasticity is the foundation of learning, memory, habit formation, emotional regulation, and even recovery from injury. It's what allows the brain to forge new connections between neurons, strengthen existing ones, and prune away unused or inefficient pathways. This ability is not limited to childhood or adolescence. It continues throughout life, shaping how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. Alcohol interferes with this fundamental process in multiple ways, limiting the brain's flexibility and diminishing its potential to evolve in healthy and adaptive directions. At the molecular level, alcohol disrupts the activity of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a key protein that supports the survival of neurons, encourages the growth of new synapses, and promotes long-term potentiation, one of the mechanisms by which learning and memory are encoded in the brain. BDNF acts like a kind of fertilizer for brain cells, nourishing them and allowing them to communicate more efficiently. When alcohol is introduced into the system, it suppresses BDNF expression, especially in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. These are the very regions responsible for forming memories, regulating emotions, and planning future behavior. Without sufficient levels of BDNF, these regions become less responsive, less resilient, and more prone to dysfunction. This means that not only does alcohol impair your ability to learn new information or develop new skills, but it also makes the brain more vulnerable to stress and cognitive decline. The hippocampus, in particular, is a region that takes a significant hit. It is crucial for forming new declarative memories, facts, experiences, and spatial navigation. Alcohol not only shrinks the volume of the hippocampus over time with chronic use, but it also inhibits the birth of new neurons in this region, a process known as neurogenesis. In a healthy brain, neurogenesis supports emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility. When alcohol impairs this process, it can lead to increased susceptibility to depression, anxiety, and rigid patterns of thought and behavior. Essentially, alcohol dulls the brain's ability to update itself in response to new information or emotional experiences. In the prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, impulse control, and rational thought, alcohol weakens the neural circuits that allow for reflective behavior and long-term planning. When neuroplasticity is compromised in this region, individuals may find it more difficult to learn from past mistakes, set meaningful goals, or regulate their actions in accordance with those goals. This is why people who drink heavily often report feeling stuck in self-defeating cycles of behavior. Their brain's capacity to shift out of old patterns and into new, healthier ones is physically diminished. This is not a failure of character, it is a biological consequence of repeated alcohol exposure altering the wiring of the brain. Another layer of impact comes from alcohol's interference with sleep, which is essential for neuroplasticity. During sleep, especially deep sleep and REM sleep, The brain consolidates memories, clears out metabolic waste, and strengthens neural connections that were activated during the day. Alcohol fragments sleep and reduces time spent in these critical stages, thereby impairing the very processes that allow the brain to integrate new information and grow from experience. A night of drinking doesn't just lead to a temporary lapse in concentration the next day, it actively undermines the brain's ability to make lasting changes and improvements. Furthermore, the effects of alcohol on neuroplasticity are not only immediate but cumulative. The longer and more frequently a person drinks, the more entrenched these negative patterns become. Neural circuits that support compulsive behaviors and emotional reactivity get stronger, while those associated with self-awareness, control, and adaptability weaken. This imbalance contributes to the reinforcing loop of addiction, where the brain becomes better at seeking alcohol and worse at resisting it. Even in people who do not meet the criteria for alcohol use disorder, regular consumption can still dull their brain's adaptability over time, reducing their potential for learning, growth, and emotional evolution. However, the story doesn't end there. The brain, while vulnerable, is also remarkably resilient, especially when alcohol use is reduced or eliminated. Neuroplasticity doesn't disappear entirely, and under the right conditions, it can be revived. When alcohol is removed from the system, BDNF levels begin to recover, the hippocampus can resume neurogenesis, the prefrontal cortex can regain its regulatory strength. But this recovery doesn't happen instantly, and it requires both time and consistency. Activities like physical exercise, quality sleep, meditation, learning new skills, and meaningful social connection can all support the brain's healing process. The very mechanisms that alcohol disrupts can, with effort and the right conditions, be reactivated and strengthened. Understanding how alcohol impairs neuroplasticity changes the way we think about drinking. It's not just a matter of having a few drinks on the weekend, it's about what those drinks are doing to your brain's ability to evolve, to improve, and to meet the demands of your life. It's about recognizing that the choice to drink isn't just a momentary indulgence, it's a biological input that can either support or sabotage your capacity to grow. When you understand that alcohol makes your brain less adaptable, less resilient, and less capable of learning, you begin to see that choosing not to drink isn't just about avoiding harm, it's about protecting and nurturing the very thing that makes you capable of change. Alcohol's impact on memory is one of the most well-documented and deeply concerning effects it has on the brain. Many people have experienced or heard about alcohol-induced blackouts, periods during which a person remains awake, active, even socially engaged, but has no recollection of events afterward. These aren't just moments of forgetfulness. They are evidence of a serious neurobiological disruption in the brain's ability to encode and store memories. This disruption primarily involves the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure deep within the brain that plays a critical role in forming new long-term memories. The hippocampus acts as a kind of relay station, converting short-term experiences into lasting impressions that can be recalled later. When alcohol enters the brain, it impairs the function of the hippocampus, making it difficult, or in some cases, impossible for new memories to be properly consolidated. What makes this particularly alarming is that during a blackout, a person can still carry out complex behaviors. They can talk, walk, even drive a car, or engage in detailed conversations. From the outside, they may appear only mildly intoxicated. But inside, their brain is failing to record the experience. The machinery that converts lived moments into stored memories is offline. And when this happens, the events simply vanish from the person's internal narrative. They may wake up the next day with no idea what they said, who they were with, or what decisions they made. This isn't a lapse of attention or an effect of sedation. It's a breakdown in the core architecture of memory formation. This form of memory loss happens because alcohol interferes with NMDA receptors in the hippocampus, which are essential for a process known as long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation is how synaptic connections between neurons are strengthened through repetition and experience. It is the physiological basis for learning. Alcohol blunts this process by disrupting calcium flow through these receptors, effectively muting the communication between neurons. When this occurs, even highly emotional or significant experiences fail to get encoded. They simply drift through the mind, unrecorded, as if they never happened. This not only prevents the creation of new memories, but also fragments the sense of self, which is built in part on our continuous experience of time and events. In addition to blocking the formation of new memories, alcohol can also erode access to existing ones. Chronic drinking has been shown to degrade white matter in the brain, which is critical for communication between different brain regions, including those involved in memory retrieval. The result can be a foggy, inconsistent recall, even of events that were deeply meaningful. Over time, heavy alcohol use may lead to a condition known as alcohol-related dementia, in which long-term memory, executive function, and emotional regulation are significantly impaired. One specific and devastating form of this is Korsakoff syndrome, often preceded by Wernicke's encephalopathy, which is caused by a deficiency in thiamine vitamin B1, often seen in chronic alcohol users. People with Korsakoff syndrome suffer from profound memory loss, confabulation, making up false memories to fill in gaps, and severe cognitive decline. This condition is often irreversible and illustrates how alcohol's impact on memory can cross the line from temporary impairment to permanent damage. Even among moderate or social drinkers, alcohol still influences memory in subtler but significant ways. Studies have shown that even low to moderate levels of alcohol can impair the ability to recall recently learned information, especially when consumed shortly after the learning experience. This effect is particularly noticeable in academic or professional contexts, where attention, recall, and application of information are crucial. A few drinks in the evening may seem harmless, but if they are consumed after a day of intense study or learning, they can interfere with the brain's ability to consolidate that knowledge during sleep. This is because alcohol not only impairs memory during intoxication, but also disrupts sleep architecture, which is critical for memory consolidation. Deep sleep and REM sleep are essential stages during which the brain reviews, organizes, and strengthens new memories. Alcohol suppresses these stages, reducing the effectiveness of this overnight memory processing system. The emotional dimension of memory is also affected by alcohol. The brain does not store memories as mere facts, it encodes them in emotional context. This is why emotionally charged experiences tend to be more vividly remembered. Alcohol dulls the amygdala, the brain's emotion processing center, reducing the emotional intensity of experiences. As a result, even events that might otherwise be remembered because they were joyful, painful, or meaningful, become flattened and less likely to be stored long-term. This emotional blunting further reduces the richness and depth of the memories that do form under the influence of alcohol. Perhaps one of the most concerning consequences of alcohol's effects on memory is the way it interferes with our ability to learn from experience. When the memory of a mistake, a bad decision, or a harmful event is incomplete or absent, the brain doesn't fully register the consequences. This prevents the formation of aversive memories, memories that guide us to avoid making the same choices in the future. If someone cannot clearly remember the outcome of an action, they are less likely to adjust their behavior. This is one reason why people often find themselves repeating the same poor decisions while drinking, despite negative outcomes. The brain, simply put, did not learn the lesson. Understanding alcohol's effects on memory reveals a deeper truth about its role in our lives. Memory is not just a mental filing system, it is the thread that ties our past to our present and future. It gives us a sense of continuity, identity, and learning. Alcohol frays that thread. It severs the connection between our actions and our awareness of them, and over time it compromises the very structures in the brain that allow us to grow, reflect, and evolve. The more often alcohol interferes with memory, the more fragmented life becomes, scattered moments without meaning, without narrative, without the clarity that memory provides. Choosing to limit or avoid alcohol, then, isn't just about protecting your ability to remember facts or names. It's about preserving your story, your growth, and your connection to who you are becoming. ChatGPT said, alcohol significantly disrupts sleep architecture, and its effects on the quality of rest go far beyond simply making someone feel drowsy. Many people mistakenly believe that alcohol helps them sleep better because it makes them fall asleep faster. While it's true that alcohol has sedative properties and can reduce the time it takes to fall asleep, what actually happens once you're asleep is far more complex and concerning. Rather than providing restorative rest, alcohol fragments and disrupts the natural stages of the sleep cycle, leading to poor sleep quality, impaired cognitive function, and increased emotional instability the next day. The human sleep cycle consists of multiple stages, including light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and REM rapid eye movement sleep. Each of these stages plays a specific role in brain function and overall health. Deep sleep is particularly important for physical restoration, immune function, and memory consolidation, while REM sleep is essential for emotional processing, learning, creativity, and long-term memory integration. Alcohol disrupts both of these stages, but especially REM sleep, which is where much of our psychological recovery takes place. In the first half of the night, alcohol may increase deep sleep at the expense of REM. This might sound beneficial at first glance, but it is actually a trade-off that comes at a cost. REM sleep is not just a luxury, it's a necessity. It is during REM sleep that the brain reprocesses emotional experiences, integrates memories, and performs critical tasks associated with neuroplasticity and mental health. By suppressing REM sleep, alcohol prevents the brain from completing this essential overnight maintenance. Over time, this leads to emotional dysregulation, poor concentration, and an increased risk of anxiety and depression. As the body metabolizes alcohol during the second half of the night, the sedative effect begins to wear off, and a phenomenon called rebound wakefulness occurs. This is when people tend to wake up unexpectedly, often tossing and turning or experiencing fragmented, shallow sleep. These interruptions disrupt the continuity of the sleep cycle, preventing the body and brain from completing full cycles and robbing a person of the sense of true rest. Even if the total duration of sleep appears sufficient, the fragmented nature of that sleep leaves the individual feeling exhausted, foggy, and emotionally off-balance the next day. Additionally, alcohol reduces melatonin production, a hormone that regulates circadian rhythms. The circadian rhythm is the internal clock that tells the body when to feel alert and when to feel sleepy. Disrupting this clock through regular alcohol use can throw the entire sleep-wake cycle out of sync, making it harder to fall asleep and wake up at consistent times. This desynchronization leads to chronic sleep disturbances and has cascading effects on hormonal regulation, metabolism, immune function, and even cardiovascular health. Moreover, alcohol worsens sleep apnea and other breathing-related sleep disorders. It relaxes the muscles in the throat and airway, increasing the likelihood of snoring and temporary pauses in breathing. These disruptions not only reduce oxygen levels in the blood, but also force the brain to partially awaken multiple times throughout the night, often without the person being aware of it. These micro-awakenings further impair sleep quality and contribute to next-day fatigue and cognitive impairment. The effects of alcohol-induced sleep disruption are not limited to the night itself. Alcohol has a powerful and often underestimated effect on emotional regulation, fundamentally altering the way the brain processes, responds to, and recovers from emotional experiences. At first glance, it might seem like alcohol relieves stress, eases anxiety, and promotes a sense of relaxation or euphoria. This is why many people turn to it after a long day or during moments of social discomfort. But beneath that initial wave of calm, alcohol is actually disrupting the delicate neurochemical balance that allows us to manage our emotions in a healthy and adaptive way. Over time, it doesn't just impair emotional regulation temporarily, it rewires the emotional centers of the brain, often making individuals more reactive, less resilient, and more prone to mood instability even when they are not drinking. The brain relies on a highly coordinated network involving the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus to assess emotional input and generate appropriate responses. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for executive function. It helps you pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The amygdala detects threats and emotional salience. It's like an emotional smoke detector. The hippocampus gives emotional experiences context and allows us to understand them in relation to our memories and expectations. And the hypothalamus, working with the autonomic nervous system, initiates physiological stress responses. Alcohol affects each of these areas in specific and damaging ways. One of the first and most consistent changes that occur is the blunting of the prefrontal cortex. This dampening effect reduces your capacity for self-awareness, rational thought, and impulse control. In the moment, this may feel like letting loose or feeling free, but it comes at the cost of diminished emotional insight and less control over reactions. When the prefrontal cortex is offline, emotional responses are more likely to be governed by the amygdala. The problem is that alcohol doesn't dampen the amygdala's activity. In fact, over time, it can heighten it. This leads to greater emotional reactivity, especially in the domains of anger, anxiety, and fear. As alcohol becomes a repeated coping mechanism, the brain begins to rely on it for short-term emotional relief. This creates a dependency loop where emotional discomfort increasingly feels intolerable without alcohol's numbing effects. Simultaneously, the underlying causes of those emotions, stress, trauma, disappointment, remain unprocessed and unresolved because alcohol disrupts the brain's capacity to learn from emotionally charged experiences. Instead of developing greater emotional resilience over time, individuals may find themselves regressing, becoming more sensitive to stress and more easily overwhelmed. The emotional roller coaster intensifies with alcohol's effects on neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA. Serotonin helps regulate mood and contributes to feelings of well-being and stability. Alcohol temporarily boosts serotonin levels, which can explain the brief elevation in mood during initial drinking. However, with continued use, the brain adapts by reducing natural serotonin production or receptor sensitivity. As a result, baseline mood decreases, and the person becomes more susceptible to depression and irritability. GABA, which is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, gives alcohol its sedative effects. It slows down neural activity and calms the brain. But chronic alcohol use causes the brain to reduce its own GABA signaling and increase excitatory signaling through glutamate to compensate. This leads to heightened anxiety, restlessness, and poor sleep, especially during withdrawal periods, which further destabilize emotional control. The cumulative impact of these neurochemical disruptions is that alcohol creates an emotional dependency. People begin to rely on alcohol not for celebration or social bonding, but to feel normal or to escape from negative emotions. But each time alcohol is used in this way, the brain becomes slightly less capable of regulating those emotions on its own. Over time, this results in an emotional baseline that is more volatile, more prone to negative bias, and less capable of self-regulation. Even minor stressors can provoke outsized emotional reactions. Relationships become more strained, as alcohol-fueled arguments, miscommunications, and emotional withdrawal increase. People may find themselves apologizing for things they don't remember saying or doing. Trust is eroded, not just between people but within the self, because the emotional responses under the influence often don't align with one's sober values or intentions. There is also a long-term consequence on the development of emotional intelligence. The ability to accurately perceive one's own emotions, understand where they come from, and express them constructively is a skill that develops over time, particularly through facing and working through life's challenges. When alcohol is used repeatedly to bypass difficult emotional states, the brain is deprived of the opportunity to grow these capacities. Emotional maturity is arrested, and individuals may find themselves repeating the same patterns in relationships, making the same decisions, and failing to evolve emotionally in ways that are necessary for long-term fulfillment and psychological well-being. Perhaps the most tragic irony is that the very substance people often turn to for emotional relief ultimately becomes the source of deeper emotional pain. What begins as a coping mechanism becomes a root cause, and the more emotionally dependent a person becomes on alcohol, the harder it is to imagine life without it, even though life with it is increasingly unmanageable. The good news is that the brain retains its capacity for emotional healing even after years of alcohol use. Once alcohol is removed from the system and the brain begins to rebalance its neurochemistry, emotional resilience can be restored. Practices like mindfulness, therapy, exercise, and deep social connection can rebuild the emotional circuitry that alcohol disrupted. But that process takes time, and it begins with the recognition that alcohol is not a true emotional ally. It is in fact a deceptive force, offering short-term escape while quietly eroding the very systems we depend on for long-term emotional stability and health. One of the more subtle but profoundly damaging effects of alcohol on the brain lies in how it alters dopamine signaling and hijacks the brain's reward system. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a central role in motivation, pleasure, reinforcement learning, and the drive to pursue goals. It is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but its real function is deeper and more complex. It governs anticipation, focus, and the willingness to exert effort for a perceived reward. When we engage in behaviors that are evolutionarily advantageous, like eating nutritious food, forming social bonds, or accomplishing tasks, dopamine is released to reinforce those behaviors and motivate us to repeat them. Alcohol short-circuits this finely tuned system by triggering a large, unnatural surge of dopamine, not as a result of genuine achievement or survival behavior, but simply through chemical manipulation. When alcohol enters the bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier, it begins to affect dopamine-producing neurons in the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. These neurons project to the nucleus accumbens, a key part of the brain's reward circuitry. Under normal conditions, this circuit is activated when something important or rewarding happens, and it signals the brain to remember that action and seek it again in the future. Alcohol, however, floods this circuit with dopamine in a way that is much more intense and rapid than most natural rewards. This intense spike creates a false signal of importance, a message that drinking is not just rewarding, but essential. The brain, which is designed to prioritize behaviors linked with survival and well-being, mistakenly places alcohol consumption near the top of that list. The danger here is that the brain is incredibly adaptive. It responds to repeated exposure to elevated dopamine by dialing back its sensitivity. This means that over time, the same amount of alcohol no longer produces the same pleasurable effects. This phenomenon, known as tolerance, drives people to drink more in order to chase the same level of satisfaction they initially experienced. But even as they increase their intake, the brain continues to down-regulate its dopamine response. The result is a paradoxical state in which alcohol no longer brings pleasure, yet the brain feels compelled to seek it anyway. This is the core mechanism of addiction, not pleasure-seeking, but a neurochemical compulsion rooted in a distorted reward system. As the brain becomes less sensitive to dopamine, other sources of pleasure and motivation begin to lose their appeal. Activities that once brought joy, like exercising, working on a passion project, spending time with loved ones, or achieving a personal goal, start to feel flat or uninteresting. The dopamine response to these activities is blunted, not because they've changed, but because the brain has recalibrated itself around alcohol as its dominant source of reward. This creates a dangerous motivational shift. Instead of being driven by real meaningful pursuits, a person becomes increasingly motivated by avoiding the discomfort of dopamine deficiency. Drinking becomes less about enjoyment and more about escaping a state of emotional and motivational numbness. This hijacking of the reward system also interferes with long-term planning and discipline. Dopamine is essential for goal-directed behavior. It gives us the mental energy and emotional drive to work toward outcomes that are not immediately rewarding. When alcohol disrupts this process, it becomes harder to delay gratification, to focus on distant goals, or to sustain effort over time. The brain, rewired for short-term chemical reward, struggles to engage with the slower, more effortful paths that lead to deeper satisfaction. This is why people who drink regularly may feel unmotivated, stuck in cycles of procrastination, or detached from their ambitions. It's not simply a matter of willpower. It's a neurochemical consequence of reward circuitry being rewired to favor instant low-effort rewards. Moreover, the dopamine system is deeply intertwined with memory and learning. The brain tags experiences that come with a dopamine rush as important, creating strong emotional memories that reinforce those behaviors. This is why certain places, people, or even times of day can become powerful triggers for cravings. If someone always drinks at a particular bar after work, that environment becomes associated with a dopamine release. Just being in that setting can cause the brain to anticipate alcohol, creating a craving that feels almost impossible to ignore. These cue-induced cravings are rooted in the brain's learning system, which alcohol has essentially taken over. Recovery from this hijacked dopamine state requires more than abstaining from alcohol. It demands a recalibration of the entire reward system. The brain needs time to regain its sensitivity to natural rewards and to rebuild its ability to find motivation in healthy, sustainable activities. This process can be uncomfortable and slow, especially at first. Many people in early sobriety report feeling emotionally flat or unmotivated, not because they are broken, but because their dopamine system is in the process of healing. It takes time for the brain to begin responding to the small victories, the real human connections, and the quiet joys that it once found rewarding. But the good news is that this process does happen. Neuroplasticity allows the brain to regenerate sensitivity to dopamine and to reassign value to experiences that genuinely enhance life. The deeper truth is that alcohol does not give pleasure, it steals it. It offers a counterfeit sense of reward while hollowing out the very system designed to help you pursue meaning, joy, and achievement. It masks disconnection while creating deeper isolation. It numbs pain in the short term while amplifying it in the long term. And most dangerously, it makes you believe that you need it to feel good, when in fact it is the very thing keeping you from feeling good at all. Understanding how alcohol manipulates your dopamine system is essential if you want to take back control of your motivation, your behavior, and ultimately your life. It's not about saying no to pleasure, it's about reclaiming the kind of pleasure that makes you feel alive, engaged, and whole. Alcohol's impact on sleep is one of the most insidious ways it disrupts health, as it directly affects the brain's ability to function during the crucial restorative processes that occur during sleep. At first glance, alcohol might seem like an effective way to unwind or fall asleep faster. After all, it has sedative properties that can make you feel drowsy and help you relax after a stressful day. However, while alcohol may make you feel sleepy initially, it creates an illusion of rest, masking its true negative effects on sleep architecture. Over time, this disruption can lead to poor sleep quality, chronic fatigue, and a host of cognitive and emotional problems. When you drink alcohol, it enters your bloodstream and affects neurotransmitters in the brain, such as GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which has inhibitory effects on neural activity, and glutamate, which is excitatory. Alcohol enhances the action of GABA, leading to feelings of calm and drowsiness. This is why alcohol has such a strong initial sedative effect, which makes people feel that they're going to sleep better. In the short term, alcohol can help you fall asleep faster by lowering your inhibitions and relaxing your body and mind. However, this initial sleep onset is deceptive because it doesn't reflect the full spectrum of restorative sleep that your body and brain need to recover. The real issue begins after the alcohol-induced drowsiness wears off, usually after a few hours of sleep. Alcohol disrupts the later stages of sleep, particularly deep sleep, also known as slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. Deep sleep is the most restorative stage, during which the body repairs muscles, tissues, and bones, and strengthens the immune system. REM sleep, on the other hand, is when the brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, and clears out neurotoxins. Both of these stages are essential for cognitive function, emotional regulation, and overall health. Alcohol suppresses the amount of time spent in these stages, preventing the brain from fully replenishing itself. As the alcohol is metabolized, there is a rebound effect. The body experiences a kind of withdrawal, causing increased heart rate, shallow breathing, and heightened neural activity. This leads to fragmented, restless sleep, often accompanied by waking up multiple times throughout the night. People who consume alcohol regularly may experience difficulty staying asleep, even though they initially fall asleep quickly. This fragmented sleep leads to shorter, less restful sleep cycles, which severely undermines the brain's ability to perform crucial repair and consolidation processes. Another significant consequence of alcohol's impact on sleep is its ability to impair the regulation of the body's circadian rhythm, which is the natural sleep-wake cycle that follows a 24-hour pattern. The circadian rhythm is controlled by the brain's internal clock, located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which synchronizes the body's biological functions with the day-night cycle. Alcohol disturbs this process by affecting the secretion of melatonin, a hormone that regulates sleep-wake patterns. Alcohol consumption, especially late in the evening, can suppress melatonin production, making it harder to fall asleep naturally and maintain a consistent sleep-wake schedule. Moreover, alcohol interferes with the brain's ability to enter the deeper stages of sleep that are required for long-term cognitive function. During deep sleep, the brain clears out waste products that accumulate during the day, a process known as the glymphatic system. Alcohol slows down this system, allowing neurotoxins, like beta-amyloid, a protein linked to Alzheimer's disease, to build up in the brain. As a result, chronic alcohol consumption can contribute to the decline of cognitive function over time, increasing the risk of neurodegenerative diseases like dementia. This connection between alcohol and cognitive decline has been observed in individuals who regularly drink excessively, as they often experience memory problems, lack of focus, and cognitive fog, which can be directly traced back to poor sleep quality. The link between alcohol and sleep is also exacerbated by the emotional and psychological effects alcohol has on individuals. As sleep quality deteriorates due to alcohol consumption, people often experience heightened stress, anxiety, and irritability, which makes it harder to relax and unwind at night. This vicious cycle further perpetuates sleep problems. The anxiety and restlessness that often arise as a result of disrupted sleep can make people more inclined to use alcohol as a coping mechanism, leading them to drink again to help them fall asleep, and thus continuing the cycle of poor sleep and dependence on alcohol for relief. For people who already suffer from sleep disorders, such as insomnia, alcohol can worsen the problem. While alcohol may seem to offer a temporary solution by promoting sleep onset, it does not address the root causes of sleep disturbances. People who rely on alcohol to manage insomnia may find themselves needing to drink more over time to achieve the same sedative effects, which further compounds the negative impacts on sleep quality. The disruption of sleep stages, the inability to reach deep restorative sleep, and the poor consolidation of memories and emotional experiences further erode the mental health of individuals who use alcohol as a sleep aid. Ultimately, alcohol not only robs you of a good night's sleep in the short term, but it also leads to cumulative sleep debt that affects mental clarity, memory, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. When the brain is deprived of restorative sleep, cognitive performance declines. The ability to focus, problem solve, and retain information is compromised. Emotionally, people become more prone to irritability, mood swings, and heightened stress. Over time, the lack of quality sleep can increase the risk of developing chronic health problems, such as cardiovascular disease, obesity, and diabetes, as well as psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety. Breaking free from the sleep-alcohol cycle is a gradual process. To restore healthy sleep, it is essential to eliminate alcohol consumption, especially before bedtime, and establish a consistent sleep routine that allows the brain to reset its natural rhythms. Incorporating practices that promote relaxation, such as mindfulness, deep breathing exercises, and a calming bedtime routine, can also support the restoration of healthy sleep patterns. While it can be challenging at first, the long-term benefits of better sleep are immeasurable. Reclaiming quality sleep leads to greater cognitive clarity, emotional stability, and overall health, benefits that alcohol cannot provide, no matter how easily it lures you into sleep at first. One of the most alarming consequences of alcohol consumption is its long-term impact on brain health, particularly its contribution to cognitive decline and mental deterioration. While the short-term effects of alcohol are often the most noticeable, such as the immediate impairment of motor skills, judgment, and memory, the long-term effects are far more insidious and can quietly erode brain function over years of chronic use. The cognitive consequences of alcohol use are not just about the occasional forgetfulness or lack of focus, they extend to structural and functional changes in the brain that can significantly affect a person's ability to think, remember, learn, and even engage in everyday activities. One of the primary ways alcohol impacts the brain is by disrupting neurogenesis, the process by which new neurons are formed. Neurogenesis is crucial for learning, memory, and cognitive function. The hippocampus, the region of the brain responsible for memory formation and emotional regulation, is particularly vulnerable to alcohol's effects. Chronic alcohol consumption leads to a reduction in the size of the hippocampus, which directly impairs the ability to form new memories and learn new information. This damage can also affect emotional regulation, leading to greater difficulty in managing stress, anxiety, and depression. As the hippocampus shrinks, individuals may experience persistent cognitive impairments, including problems with memory recall, difficulty retaining new information, and a reduced ability to process complex tasks. Alcohol also affects the brain's prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision-making, problem-solving, impulse control, and executive functioning. The prefrontal cortex is critical for managing complex thoughts and regulating behavior. When alcohol disrupts this part of the brain, individuals may find themselves making impulsive decisions, having trouble controlling their emotions, or engaging in risky behaviors that they would typically avoid. Over time, the consistent underperformance of the prefrontal cortex can lead to a more generalized cognitive decline, where higher-order thinking becomes progressively more difficult. This makes it harder to adapt to changing environments, plan for the future, or manage the challenges of daily life. At a biochemical level, alcohol causes an imbalance in neurotransmitter systems that are essential for cognitive function. Alcohol's initial effects, feeling relaxed or euphoric, are linked to its enhancement of gamma-aminobutyric acid activity, which inhibits neural firing and creates sedative effects. However, the chronic use of alcohol leads to the brain compensating by increasing the activity of excitatory neurotransmitters, such as glutamate. This process creates an imbalance in the brain's chemical environment that interferes with efficient neural communication. The result is a brain that is less able to function smoothly and efficiently, particularly when it comes to tasks that require higher-level processing, such as critical thinking, decision-making, and memory recall. In addition to chemical imbalances, alcohol-induced damage to the white matter in the brain is a significant contributor to cognitive decline. White matter consists of the neural pathways that facilitate communication between different regions of the brain. Alcohol impairs the integrity of white matter, which disrupts the brain's ability to send and receive signals efficiently. This can result in slower processing speeds, difficulty coordinating thoughts and actions, and an overall reduction in cognitive agility. White matter damage is particularly concerning because it is linked to a decline in executive functions, such as attention, working memory, and cognitive flexibility, which are essential for day-to-day problem-solving and decision-making. Perhaps one of the most profound effects of alcohol on the brain is its contribution to the development of neurodegenerative diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Chronic alcohol abuse is a known risk factor for early-onset dementia, and long-term alcohol use accelerates the progression of neurodegenerative diseases in individuals who are genetically predisposed to them. The mechanisms behind this are multifaceted. First, alcohol contributes to the accumulation of amyloid plaques, abnormal clumps of protein that accumulate in the brains of individuals with Alzheimer's disease. Amyloid plaques disrupt communication between neurons and contribute to the degeneration of brain tissue. Additionally, alcohol's neurotoxic effects can exacerbate oxidative stress, a process in which free radicals damage brain cells, leading to inflammation and further neuronal death. Over time, this combination of processes can accelerate cognitive decline and increase the risk of developing irreversible conditions like Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia. Beyond the structural damage, alcohol's interference with brain plasticity, the ability of the brain to adapt and reorganize itself, also plays a significant role in cognitive decline. Alcohol impairs the brain's ability to form new neural connections, which is necessary for learning and adapting to new situations. This means that even if a person tries to engage in mentally stimulating activities or therapy to combat cognitive decline, alcohol's long-term effects can undermine these efforts by limiting the brain's capacity to create new connections and strengthen existing ones. This is particularly evident in individuals who are in recovery from alcohol use disorder. While they may show some improvement in cognitive function after sustained sobriety, the damage to brain plasticity can take a significant amount of time to reverse, if at all. The impact of alcohol on cognitive function is not limited to those with alcohol use disorder. Even moderate drinking can have a detrimental effect on brain health over time. Studies have shown that individuals who engage in regular moderate drinking have a higher risk of experiencing cognitive decline as they age compared to non-drinkers. The cumulative effects of alcohol on the brain, including subtle impairments in memory, attention, and executive functioning, can add up over the years, leading to a noticeable decline in cognitive abilities. This is especially concerning as the global population ages and the risk of dementia and cognitive decline becomes more pronounced. If the current trends in alcohol consumption continue, we may see a rise in alcohol-related cognitive impairments that could place a significant burden on public health systems. In addition to the direct effects of alcohol on brain health, its impact on mental health can also indirectly contribute to cognitive decline. Chronic alcohol use is strongly linked to psychiatric disorders such as depression and anxiety, which can further exacerbate cognitive impairments. Depression, for example, is associated with decreased hippocampal volume and cognitive dysfunction, particularly in the areas of memory and executive function. Alcohol-induced brain damage, coupled with the cognitive and emotional challenges that come with mental health issues, creates a vicious cycle that is difficult to break. The good news is that the brain is capable of remarkable recovery, and even after years of alcohol use, significant improvements can be made once sobriety is achieved. However, the process of healing and rebuilding cognitive function is slow and requires consistent effort. Recovery often involves a combination of lifestyle changes, such as proper nutrition, exercise, mental stimulation, and mindfulness practices to support brain health and cognitive function. For those in recovery from alcohol use disorder, therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) and neurofeedback can also help retrain the brain to improve cognitive abilities and emotional regulation. Ultimately, the damage alcohol does to the brain is far-reaching and multifaceted, affecting both its structure and its function. While it might seem harmless to indulge in a few drinks, the long-term consequences can be devastating, leading to cognitive decline, memory loss, and an increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases. Understanding the full scope of alcohol's effects on brain health is crucial for making informed decisions about consumption and for promoting healthier, more sustainable lifestyle choices that protect brain function for the long term.